Well, good morning and welcome to this session focused on thinking theologically from the series Living the Questions. I am Jackie Runstein, and this has Ben Ball, the other half of our teaching team. Feedback we received from last week's session convinced us to alter our approach to the subject. By the way, we appreciated all of those comments, and please keep them coming. So this morning, after viewing and hearing John Dominic Crossan, we hope that you will respond with your own personal experiences. Ben and I will be acting primarily to keep the challenge in focus. First, let's listen to Crossan.
Are you getting it?
Yes.
You're shaking your heads, yes.
The four questions that I would address to 21st century Christians are these four. What is the character of your God? When you think about God, what do you imagine? So the first question is, what is the character of your God? The second question is, what is the content of your faith? You can't imagine any longer that a person says, I have faith. You say, that's great. There are certain faith-based initiatives that aren't very great. Al-Qaeda is a faith-based initiative. So I want to ask, what is the content of your faith? What do you believe in? Tell me you believe, what do you believe in? Second question. The third question is, what is the function of your church? What are you coming together for? And if you tell me you come together to worship God, then I will repeat the question. What is the purpose of worshiping God? So the third question is, what is the function of your church? What are you doing? And the final one is, what is the purpose of your worship? In case you said you're going to worship God in that preceding one, how does God want to be worshipped? Does God do prayers then, or is God more interested in prayers that lead to a life? So the four questions: what is the character of your God? What is the content of your faith? What is the function of your church? And what is the purpose of your worship? And then, of course, it goes back to what is the character of your God? It's like a round that goes back. These are the questions we have to face. We must
So let's start with his first question that he says must be asked. What is the character of your God?
Can everyone answer at once? Tolerant, compassionate, caring, loving.
Challenging.
Okay, how do you experience one of those characteristics?
Through relationships with one another.
Can you give us an example, please?
When someone at church stops and asks me sincerely, how are you doing? Or explores with me what's been going on in my life, I feel loved and cared about.
Okay, so
that's giving of yourself to another and listening to another.
Okay, all right. Someone else.
I said challenging. The way I experience it is an opportunity is presented to me, and I get this really difficult feeling in my stomach. And an example of that is when I was trying to get the garden started at church, Laura said, "Are you willing to own it?" I thought, oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
And so of course I had to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
tolerant and compassionate. We accept, or I feel that our community accepts individuals as they are, without change, without requiring them to be something else, without demanding that they meet standards that we set outside of them and God sets outside of them. That God accepts them. And I go back to my mentor, Leon, who said to me, you know, you contain within yourself all that God requires. And I think our community fosters that belief.
Can you give us an example of how that happens in our community? You're talking about the community of the church or covenant?
I'm talking about our covenant community.
Yeah, yeah. Can you give us an example of that?
This is a negative example in that it's reactive to those who don't accept gays, people of different beliefs, that structure religion as a narrow. You've got to believe exactly what I believe, or you're the devil, or you're going to hell, or I can't have anything to do with you because we can't even have a dialogue because you're of the devil. So that's couching it negatively, and I hate to do that because I think it's a positive part of our church that it's just a given, or in my experience, it is a given that you accept the other individual and explore them
I say
and try to
something.
find out about them as they are. You don't try to change them.
Okay, Laura, you had your hand up.
It's just to add on to what Paul is saying, I think a positive example might be the way we do communion, our open table, where everyone is welcome and God welcomes everyone and we welcome everyone and no one is ever denied the bread and the cup. So if you're present and you want to take, it is yours and everyone is always welcome. So I think we embody, I mean, I totally hear your negative examples, Paul, and agree with them, but that's one example on the other side of, you know, every time we take communion, we embody this welcome of God, I think.
So your example is an example of what characteristics of God?
The one Paul's been talking about, this welcome, compassion, loving God that welcomes all of us.
And is tolerant.
May I say something? I was attracted to this church. I'd heard about it through listening to NPR because commercials are run every once in a while, or at least it used to be. But my former church, which was Westbury Methodist, we have a director of music and worship who is in a same-sex couple, and he has fulfilled all the requirements and wants to be ordained. And the Methodist Church will not allow that. Covenant allowed him to be ordained. And that was the first time I walked through the doors of Covenant Church. And it's had a big effect on me. And that shows the openness that no one is going to be rejected because of some particular ordinance that perhaps they are violating. Man-made ordinance, not necessarily, well, that's my reason. Okay.
Jackie's in the Bible.
So,
okay, thank you. Someone else. What is the character of your God?
Well, several months ago, Laura encouraged me to write a sermon based on Peter's vision of the descending sheet full of unclean animals that he's urged to kill and eat. And I did some work on that a couple of months ago, but I haven't pursued it lately. But I think that's part of what I think this is talking about. God says, what I have created is clean. There is no unclean. And so that's part of the openness, compassion, loving kindness that I think is embodied in God and in us when we're at our best.
Okay. Can you give us an example from your experience?
Well, I think the one that was just expressed, I remember back in the 1980s, Jim Grant, our then pastor, performed the first marriage ceremony that I know about between two gay men, and nobody at church blinked an eye. That seemed like the right thing to do. I think we've been like that as long as I've been part of the church. And as we've become more aware of places where people have been marginalized, we've tried to prevent that or ameliorate that or encourage people to feel included even if other people reject them.
Okay, thank you. Someone else, what is the character of your God?
So I identify with those that have spoken before, but this is a little bit different. I think as human beings, we tend to create these meaning projects, something we're involved with, and we're doing it sort of to work for meaning. And I think one of the natures of God is a little bit different than what we've been talking about. It's a sheer mystery that you bump into, and those meaning projects fail. And the most dramatic experience I had of that was the day I was leaving this little Egyptian village of Bayad. And Susan and the kids were already gone. They had already gone home. And you have to just picture the desert on one side and the Nile on the other side. I was sort of giddy. I'm exaggerating a little, how great I am. I've been this volunteer in this poor little Egyptian village, and now I'm going home. So I picked up a hitchhiker who wanted to go, and we were driving down the road, and we saw this truck overturned on the side. And you have to understand, pickup trucks in Egypt are like taxis. They're loaded with people. And this one had flipped. And then we saw a body with a sheet on it. And we got out and asked if there's anything we could do. There was nothing we could do, so we went on. But in 2 minutes, I went from some strange idea that the meaning of my life had been this service, and all of a sudden I got confronted with just the absoluteness of mortality and death. And this is not entirely negative. It frees you up. I suddenly realize it's all open. I don't know what's going to happen. All those things I was thinking are not important. What happens next? And I think I experience smaller versions of that on a very regular basis, where I have some dream that trying to make my life meaningful, and somehow something happens, and then I'm back to having my life on my hands and figuring out what to do.
Okay, Bill Martin, do you have your hand up?
Bill, you're muted.
You're muted.
I know. I was trying to. I have, of course, I'm familiar with the various images of God in the Bible, and I must admit I have trouble with them. My view of God is fairly unknown, amorphous, but I consider myself a follower of Jesus, a listener to the prophets, and I identify those things. So when I think of God as with Jesus, as wanting justice, as exemplifying love, as offering healing, and that's Jesus said he was God's son, and so he probably knows what God's like. So I'm a follower of Jesus, but I have difficulty moving beyond. I assume certainly identify with mystery. I acknowledge or I believe in at some level of a conscious overarching power, but I can't. I can no longer articulate that in a way that that I'm willing to make disciples for, or at least to teach and say, well, I know this is right.
Someone else, the character of your God.
I don't know how to articulate this perfectly, as though there's such a thing. But there seems to be something throughout the prophets and Jesus where God is calling us to nonviolent resistance to the empires of oppression. And that's over and over again. It's, it's Amos, it's Jeremiah, it's Jesus. And what that looks like for us might be different for what it looked like for them. But I think one of the characters of God is this compelling us toward justice and healing and hope for all of creation, which means non-violently opposing the empires of oppression.
How can we experience that, Laura? That drive?
I think we all experience it in that feeling Susan was talking about, that gut feeling of being compelled to do something, to do more, to march, to vote, to write a letter. I mean, there are all sorts of ways this can be embodied, but I think at Covenant, we've had several letter writing campaigns. We've had several sermons and Sunday schools about oppression and how we might be involved in working against oppression. My children are being loud in the background. I'm sorry about that. So I think it's personal, but it's also corporate. We do things together where we work to oppose empires of injustice.
Let me comment a little bit on Bill Martin's witness. That certainly communicates with me, talking about the images that are in the Bible. Let's hear a minute from Spahn about that, and then we'll discuss that.
Get away from this theistic supernatural God that imperils our humanity and come back to a God who permeates life so deeply.
We missed the beginning of that, which is so important. A little bit. All right, we'll get the last of Cross, and then we can get the first of Spahn.
Simply prayers said, or is God more interested in prayers that lead to a life? So the 4 questions: what is the character of your God? What is the content of your faith? What is the function of your church? And what is the purpose of your worship? And then, of course, it goes back to what is the character of your God? It's like a round that goes back. These are the questions we have to face.
We must get away from this theistic supernatural God that imperils our humanity and come back to a God who permeates life so deeply that our humanity becomes the very means through which we experience the divine presence. Some studies suggest
Spahn talks about a theistic, supernatural God. And if you read the Bible literally, That's the image of an objective person would get, I think. Theistic, meaning a creator who interferes with his creation occasionally, and who has a personal relationship with his created creatures. And Spong says we have to get away from that. My witness is that in the pre-enlightenment, pre-scientific universe, had two stories. And it wasn't a two-story universe. The two-story was their universe, and the only one that they knew. And they used metaphors and told myths in that context. But we don't live in that universe, and therefore we need new metaphors that we don't have yet. We need new myths to inform us about the reality that we live in. And I think Bill recalls mystery. And Crossan says, yes, mystery with a capital M. The unknown, the unknown unknown. The unknowable unknown. So, but we don't have an image for that. Worse than that, we violate almost with pleasure the Second Amendment.
Amendment?
The second commandment. Talk about a Freudian slip. Anybody know what the second commandment is? Laura, you don't get the answer. The second, I don't know that the commandments are in order, but I think it's more than coincidence that the second commandment says, no images. No images. And the Jews and the Muslims have got it right, I think. No images. Now, if you want to know what God looks like, go to the Sistine Chapel and lean back and look at the ceiling, and that's what God looks like. How powerful a tragedy. And maybe it's just me as a former Southern Baptist, but I can't get that image out of my mind. It is so powerful, and we have nothing to substitute for it. If we've got God nailed down so that we can paint his picture, then that's not the God of the Bible. That's not the God of the Old Testament or the God of the New Testament. The Hebrew name for God is YHWH. No vowels. You cannot pronounce it. So one of the characters of my God is the mystery with a capital M. Another of my colleagues says reality with a capital R, the unknown reality. We even participate in our personalization of God by attributing to that mystery human emotions. God gets angry. We displease him. So we build on that idol unconsciously. Does anyone else have problems with getting away from the supernatural, theistic, anthropomorphic God? Anybody else encounter that problem, or am I the only one in this group? Okay, Bill Martin.
I've course, what I was saying is I have trouble with that, but I can't help but mention one of my favorite things that I've ever heard Laura say is she said ask us to picture God as an old man and his son, and maybe there's a dove flying around, and she says, God is not two men and a bird. That has stuck with me because yes, that's what I was trying to say haltingly about having difficulty thinking of that, but that I also have difficulty thinking all of this is just an accident, and that various religious geniuses, including Jesus and the prophets and others, have articulated things that make great sense to me, and I choose to try to live up to those kinds of ideals and the way that Laura expressed that earlier in this discussion.
Anybody else have trouble with the supernatural anthropomorphic heresy?
I would add one thing to what our church believes is that God is open-ended. That is, God is not a closed box and specifically defined. And I will playfully say to you, Ben, with the Southern Baptist upbringing, you referred God exclusively as Him. Just
What do you say?
how difficult.
Exclusively as him.
Oh, yeah.
How difficult it is to get outside the concepts that we have rationalized in our mind, or we have accepted, that we don't even know we've accepted. We don't even know the limits that we've put on ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to the second question that Crossan says must be dealt with. What is the content of your faith? Let me tell a little story that I think clarified for me what I think he's asking. The story is told about a showman walking across Niagara Falls on a wire. Pretty amazing feat. And crowd at both ends of the wire watching. And he turns around then and walks back across Niagara Falls on the wire, this time pushing a wheelbarrow. And he makes it, and everybody's just clapping like crazy. And he walks up to a guy and he says, do you believe I can do that again? And the guy says, yeah, I believe you can. He says, then get in my wheelbarrow. I think that's what belief is about. What are you willing to bet your life on? What do you depend on? What do you count on? What is your behavior based on? It's not an intellectual thing. I believe that this is Sunday. That's not the kind of belief that I think we're talking about. What's the content of your faith?
Well, I'm going to say that something real important to me is a belief that there is grace. That if I try something, doing my best, and I fail at it, I can be forgiven for it. That God, whatever or whoever God is, understands my motivation and my good will, even if I mess up, and I can be forgiven to try again.
Can you give us an example of your depending on that?
Um, well, not exactly, but I can tell you why I think what I think. I've told this story several times, and people in this group have heard it. When I was first learning to drive, my first day of driver's ed behind the wheel happened, and my dad came to pick me up after school. He asked me if I wanted to drive the car home, and I said, sure. Once he asked me, did I drive okay with Coach Bood? And I said, sure. And so he said, okay. And I got behind the wheel and I drove home very carefully, checked my mirrors, did all my turn signals and everything. But when we got close to the driveway, I was still going 30 miles an hour and I didn't slow down. And I wheeled into the driveway, ran over my sister's bicycle and crashed into the back end of our other car. And after Dad ascertained that neither one of us was hurt, he got out and looked at the damage to both cars. He looked at me and said, it could have been worse, and went inside. And my God is like that. My God forgives me when I make a mistake that I didn't know I was making, and lets me try again. So that's not God, but that's one place where I learned what God was like, was from my father.
And how do you live differently knowing that you're the recipient of grace?
Well, you don't have to be quite so cautious. You don't have to be so tiptoey around questions that give your gut that bad feeling that Susan was talking about. You can say, okay, I know that Black Lives Matter, that people are being discriminated against, and it's important for me as a white person to say this is not right, and I'm not happy with the situation the way it is. I've got to do something. Maybe what I do isn't the right thing the first time, and somebody will tell me, oh, that wasn't what we needed you to do. And then I'll say, okay, I'll try to do better next time. And that's what God frees me up to do. I don't have to wait till I'm sure that I'm right. I just say, this is how I feel about it. God's giving me some information, and maybe I'll get some more information later that will improve my aim about what I'm trying to do. But I don't have to wait till I've got all the information. I can just get started, because God will forgive me if I mess up, and my friends and my loved ones will forgive me because they love me, and God loves me, and I know that.
Okay. Someone else, what's the content of your faith?
Well, going back to that garden example, the Covenant vegetable garden, when I decided, okay, yeah, I of all people have to say I will own it, I was very clear that did not mean I was going to be down in the garden every day, every week, watering, weeding, etc. But that there was, that if the community really was behind it, they would back me up. And that's true. We have more than 20 people on the garden list, and no one person has to do it all the time. So anyway, but if the community really didn't think we needed a garden, I would have found out, and I would have been down there every day by myself trying to keep it going, and then I would have had to make another adjustment to what our community needed.
Okay. Yeah, Bill Martin.
This relates to what I said earlier, but the way I feel that I'm living out my faith. If, for example, in the work that I do with drug policy, I think Jesus wanted to heal the sick and visit the sick and try to alleviate their miseries, and also to visit them in prison, free the prisoners. That's one of the things I work for when I talk about ending mass incarceration, or not incarcerating people for, let's say, not putting people in jail for marijuana use. I feel when I argue for those things, I not only incorporate those in my arguments, maybe in op-eds, and say that Christians can support decriminalization of marijuana. Christians can support the use of needle exchange programs and provide biblical answers. But I also think that, I mean, it's not just a rhetorical device. That is part of my own want to do that I believe that that's what Jesus was talking about Whether Jesus knows that's what I'm doing is another issue, but that influenced me and to try to work for justice and for expressing love in a variety of ways, for feeding the sick, for all of those things. I think I'm perfectly aware that I work next to people who want the same things, but do it without any conscious reference to a religious motivation. But I can also say, these are my stories, these are my songs, and these are the things that impel me in these ways, and I believe they are positive. And so, again, I've said before that I used to say, I believe all I can, I would believe everything if only I could, and now I'm content to say, I profess to be a Christian and I decline to submit to tests of certification.
So the element of your faith that you're illustrating is that Jesus is a worthy model. Is that what you're saying?
Sure.
I'm not trying to put words in your
No. I'm perfectly happy with that. When we talked several weeks ago, when I was worship leader, I talked about in his steps, and I realize that's simplistic and a number of things wrong with that, but there are worse models. That's
I just excuse me, just a quick comment. I was pontificating to someone, believe it or not, on one occasion, and they said, "Well, where does Jesus fit in all that?" And my visceral response was, "He's my eschatological hero." So, okay, someone else. What's the content of your faith?
I like David's sense of grace and that if I can truly believe that I can receive grace, then I can pass it on to others. And that's be grace, give grace to others.
Can you give us an example out of your life for that? Where you've experienced grace and therefore enabled to be the medium of grace to another?
My entire life has been full of grace, and there's no reason or purpose for that. It is unanticipated, unearned. I have a wonderful life. I've had a wonderful life, and I just wish that for everyone. And so not a specific example, but that has allowed me to hope for grace for others, and to be tolerant, and to look for the places in others' lives that grace will help them. And in my experience, it's more on individuals' failure to see grace or to recognize it than the fact that it's there in their lives.
Very good. Well, as Crossing pointed out, these are the 4 questions. Did you get the screen? You got the screen?
Yes.
Huh?
yes.
They're saying yes.
Okay. These are the 4 questions that must be asked, he says. And in this short time, we've only been able to touch on 2 of those 4. And he also points out that that they feed into each other, so that it's a non-ending dialogue that we must carry on.
Okay,
Yeah,
me,
yeah.
okay. What a difference theology has made in my life. Crossan's round for theology serves me well in my everyday life, particularly the what is the character of my God? Recently, I was gently admonished by my son-in-law, Bob, about a cartoon that I had forwarded to relatives, one in which God was slyly implored to cause a president to die. Bob obviously had a better concept of the character of God than I did. It's my hope that studying Crossan's teachings has made a big difference in my life, and it's my hope that studying his teachings has enlarged yours. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today.
Thank you very much, both of you, for